Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mark Jensen, and I'm the President and CEO of Farm Credit Services of America and Frontier Farm Credit. We're just thrilled to have you join us this afternoon. I know it's a busy time of the year, so for all of you to take the time to spend a few minutes with us is truly appreciated. We're hearing from producers that, particularly our young and beginning ones, that they want to learn more and more about financial acumen, just general business practices. So that was really the point of today's discussion and what we'll focus in on. The farm credit system has been financing young and beginning producers in agriculture for over 100 years. So if you think about that, we've financed 5 or 6 generations of producers, and our goal is to finance the next 5 or 6 generations. So, financing this current generation of young and beginning producers is critically important to us and our board of directors, and we just feel it's a big part of the value that we can bring to agriculture. You're participating in what we call our side-by-side digital monthly series. So on a monthly basis, we're going to offer the opportunity for our young and beginning producers to connect with experts in a variety of different areas related to topics that our young and beginning producers really want to know more about. So again, we're really thankful and appreciative of all of you joining us today. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our speaker for today. I'm happy to introduce Nick Jorgensen. And Nick is a producer and Farm Credit Services of America board member located in South Dakota. We're thrilled to have Nick a part of this series today. And how this is going to work, I have some prepared questions for Nick that he's going to provide his insight around. We'll do that for about a half hour or so. And then we'll open it up right about 1 o'clock for just an open Q&A. So Nick, thanks for being here today. And why don't I start with this question? Why don't we just have you tell us about yourself and take us through your path, agriculture, at least to this point.
Absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me, Mark. It's a real honor to do this. I got a lot of respect and a lot of good feelings towards the side-by-side program, whether it be the in-person conference or this digital series that you guys are working through in 2020. That conference had a big effect on my life, and I'm glad that I get to be on the stage now, talking to other young producers like myself. So yeah, about myself, I'm a CEO of Jorgensen Land and Cattle in Ideal, South Dakota. We farm and ranch out here. It's my dad, myself, my cousin, and my uncle, and our spouses are the owners of the operation. We've got 22 full-time employees, farm 13,000 acres, run about 1,000 cows, and then we've got a hunting lodge. And my path through agriculture started really young. As you know, I got a son in kindergarten, and I remember being a kindergartner when they asked you what you wanted to be when you grew up. And my answer, I think 17 of the 18 years I was in school was I was going to be a farmer. And so my entire life, it's what I wanted to do. I grew up on this operation. And even when I got out of high school, there was no question when I went to college that my education was going to be around agriculture and specifically the business of agriculture. Got my ag business degree, and then I got my master's in economics after that in 2014. And then in 2016, I got my MBA from Dakota Wesleyan University. So my focus, really my adult life, has been around the business management side of agriculture, and I've got a skill set for that. But I love all things farming. I live out here. I've got my wife, Ashley. We've got 4 young sons, a 5-year-old, a 3-year-old, and 2 twin 5-month-olds. So, as I think about some of the questions we're going to talk about later, I got a lot of stuff that I got to plan for. As a young producer, I got kids that I need to be thinking about my legacy, even though I'm only 29. You got to start having those internal conversations as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Well, Nick, there's no question about where your heart lies. It's both in that farming operation and those twins, right? Everybody's wondering whether you're getting any sleep or not. So,
we actually get lots of sleep. My wife's a certified sleep coach, and we get like 12. We sleep as much as we want to. 12 hours of sleep a night. So
that's awesome. You might want to give out our business card. I bet there's some other people on this call that might be interested. So Nick, let's shift gears a little bit. I mentioned that you're on the Farm Credit Services of America Board of Directors. So why don't you talk about what your role as the young and beginning representative on our board means, and how does that work, and what role do you play?
Yeah. And so maybe I'll start that with how I got on the board, Mark, if you don't mind.
You bet.
And it actually comes back to the side-by-side conference. My wife and I and our oldest son attended the side-by-side in 2015. And it was actually at that conference when I learned about the young and beginning appointed position for the board. And it was actually my wife that learned about it. The MC at the time just made a very brief passing comment to the crowd and said, we've got this young and beginning position. If anyone's interested, come find me. And I blew it off. I'm going to be 100% honest. I blew it off. And it was actually my wife who said, hey, did you hear that? You should go talk to that guy. Well, I did. And lo and behold, 8 months later, I was appointed to the FCS America board. And, my role really isn't functionally any different than a regular board member. But the intent of the position is to get a young and beginning producer at the table to bring the perspective, that I have or we have as young and beginning producers, because it does add value, in my opinion. There's a group of people sitting here listening to us today that are in my shoes. There's a lot of people in ag that are of our generation, of our age group. And it's important that we're at the table as customers for this association.
Well, and Nick, I'm going to throw a couple kudos your way. We don't need to spend a lot of time on it, but it's worth noting, and you probably just underestimated your role or understated your role in terms of the leadership opportunities you've had within our board too, both at the committee level and just so everybody knows, Nick is our vice chair of the FCS America board. Having not been on the board very long, so your impact has been huge, and we're just blessed to have you, Nick. So,
well, I'm just happy I can be in the role. It's an extreme honor, and the benefit to me has been great. I'm happy to serve, but being on this board, it has made me a better leader and a better businessman and a better person, and I deeply appreciate that.
Well, again, we're just thrilled to have you. So let's talk about successful producers and some of those dynamics. So when you think about, in today's environment and maybe even into the future, what do you think separates the successful producers from the ones that maybe are going to struggle more, again, both today and as you look forward?
Yeah. So one of the things I'm going to do several times in this talk, Mark, is I'm going to steal some quotes from people. And I'm going to steal a quote from my uncle. Our operation, we won the Leopold Conservation Award back in 2015. And the interviewer asked my uncle the same question: what separates a successful operation from maybe one that's struggling? And his answer was related to the 1980s, but I think it really applies, in the agriculture environment we're in today. And he said, farmers by nature are good operators. We can raise a crop, we can raise cattle. The difference comes when an operations decides that it's going to focus not only on operating, but managing. In my opinion, that's where it's at. And I speak maybe from a biased perspective because that's my job. But a lot of the times what I see is people that, when they're stretched out thin and there's lots of work to be done, the first thing that's going to go is management, is sitting down in the office or taking the time to analyze your business and see how you're doing. That's, in my opinion, what separates a successful operation from one that's struggling in this time or in the 80s or, really just about all the time.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you think, 30 years ago, production management was probably the focus. And, a lot of that's been to somewhat normalized through genetics and and farming practices. Now it's more about, I think it's safe to say agriculture does a great job of filling a bin. We probably could use some work on the decisions we make when we take it out of the bin. So,
yep. And I maybe just make another comment too, where I think some operations struggle, and that's when it comes to generational transition, succession planning, things like that. Mm-hmm. And that's a hard subject to really even go down the path of. Mm-hmm. In any operation, and ours is no different. I think we've made good progress on our operation as far as succession planning and equity transition goes, but there's definitely still work to be done. And I don't think that's probably more common than it is rare that people just aren't 100% sure what's going to happen when things move from generation to generation.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that can be really tough. So you think about, like myself as a 29-year-old kid, and people like me, we're putting our whole lives into this. I made decisions, and it affected my life. I made the choice to come back home. And for some people, the unknown part, like what's going to happen when dad decides to be done or mom decides to be done or they pass away, you think about what's resting on that decision that you know nothing about in a lot of cases. It's terrifying. And if you've got 4 kids like I do, it gets even more terrifying. What's going to happen? And then I'm not okay with that. I'm not okay with not knowing what's going to happen to my 4 kids when their grandfather decides it's time for him to be done.
Yeah.
So,
and as operations get larger and more complex, just the complexity of those decisions get even greater as well. Yeah. Your operation is pretty sizable, and I'm sure that's a lot to think through. So I'm going to shift to, you mentioned that you're the CEO of, the family operation, and you have family members involved in that, obviously. So, I'll caveat to, before I respond to this question, I'm sure your family never has any disagreements or conflicts, but I'm going to ask the question, if you did, how do you work through conflict and disagreements in the family business? Because, we all got them, right? So
I'm going to be 100% honest. We had one yesterday, Mark. It was an uncomfortable one. It was a big one. And so I'm glad you asked the question, because it's fresh in my mind. What do you do to get past that? Because, I'm the CEO of this operation, and that's my job title, but I work with my dad and my uncle and my cousin. These guys, they changed my diapers. And so you think about, how do you be a CEO or lead those people? And to me, it goes back to, at the end of the day, when you have disagreements, it's because it's a father talking to a son, or it's a brother talking to a brother. And it's easy to get emotional in a situation like that versus a regular work environment. And what I do personally to get through that is, no matter how heated it gets or how ugly it is, just, you got to remember, it's your dad, it's your uncle, it's your brother, it's your cousin, and you love those people, right? No matter how heated it gets, I love them, they love me. And I'm not a touchy-feely guy, but we're family. And at the end of the day, family has got to take priority. So you got to be able to let stuff roll off your back. Try your best to be respectful. I do my absolute best to not raise my voice, to not get personal when I do get upset. And it just helps things, kind of smooth over more quickly. Another approach I take is, listen, I got a master's in economics, so if it's not obvious, it should be. I'm a numbers guy. I'm a logic guy. And that's how I approach difficult situations. You and I disagree. That's fine. Yeah. Here's why I think the way I do. I didn't just make it up. I sat down. Here's why I think we should make this decision. Business-wise, it makes more sense. If you disagree, that's fine. But I'd like you to prove to me, how I'm wrong and how we can do things differently. And then there's no emotion there. It's not like, I feel this is a good idea. No, I know this is a good idea. And let's talk about other ideas that are good and be respectful to each other and stay away from emotion.
Yeah.
And it generally works.
Yeah. Yeah. That's no different than what we deal with running our organization as well. It's, it's easy to get caught up in it's the bog sat decision-making method. It's a bunch of guys sitting around a table, or a bunch of gals sitting around a table. That usually a lot of those decisions are driven off of just emotion and, what people think at the time. Just like here, we try to combine a lot of data and information and make informed decisions, but you also have to manage the emotional part of it. So people sometimes don't like it, but I try and avoid emotion when it comes to business decisions. Makes things go a lot smoother, in my opinion. Yeah. Yeah. Especially with a family.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about professional development. So, how do you approach professional development? And, as you think about your future, how do you want to keep developing yourself?
Yeah. So I'm going to bring up the most obvious one to myself first. And that's being a director for this association. This association provides a lot of resources to ensure that directors we've got sitting on the board are the most developed and high functioning as they can be. And for me personally, it's been a huge resource. Like I said at the beginning, being on this as board, I'm glad I can, contribute and do things to make the association better. But I've taken a lot of stuff home from a professional development perspective, especially as a young and beginning producer. I mean, I can confidently say there's not another 29-year-old farmer and rancher out there that's had the opportunity that I've had. And so I greatly appreciate that. Now, outside of Farm Credit Services of America, there's a couple actions we've taken at home. We are a larger operation. One of the focuses we've taken over the last few years is getting involved with, more or less, it's not been a professional development firm, but it's actually been a firm that helps us with equity transition and business structure and things like that. And we've been working with them for about 4 years. And part of what's come along with that process are some, professional development, training related things that we've done at home to make sure that the people that are leading this organization are good leaders. Because, I'll be frank, most farmers and ranchers just don't get the opportunity in their own personal lives unless, in my opinion, they're active about it and make the choice and say, hey, I'm gonna do this. I'm gonna go get involved. It doesn't just fall in your lap. So we've been proactive, and I think it's paid volumes for us here at home.
Yeah. Whether you have, 1 or 2 employees or, we have about 1,700, the recruitment, development, and training of employees is it's a lifeblood to your future. So, again, it applies to everybody.
Even if you've got 1 employee, Mark, just think about that. You're responsible for somebody. You're responsible for their well-being. You're responsible for their professional development. And it's incumbent upon you as that leader, whether, like you said, it's 1 employee or 1,700, to kind of model the way, right? And make sure that this person has what they need to be successful professionally and in their personal life and all that. So.
Sure. I'm going to shift to, obviously there's always a lot going on in agriculture and volatility and cycles. And, you live that every day. We live that every day as a lender that focuses on finance and ag. But let's talk about opportunities. So what do you feel are some of the biggest opportunities for young and beginning producers as you look into the future?
Well, to me, the number one opportunity right now, and frankly, it's been because of what happened in 2020 with COVID and all that, but interest rates are as low as they could almost possibly get, right? And so, ag is a capital intense business. And if you're trying to start on your own, standing up, and your own farm or ranch just requires debt. There's just no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And there's probably not a better time from a financing perspective to be thinking about that. Am I right? You do it every day, Mark.
Right.
And so that's an opportunity. And if you're part of an established business, like I am, now's a decent time to be thinking about expanding if you have a business model that's profitable today, right? Now, I wouldn't be recommending expanding if, you've been in the red the last couple of years. But if you've been able to make your way through right now and be profitable, one of the hardest times we've had in the last 10, 15 years in ag, maybe it's time to be thinking about a little bit of expansion. At least we are here at home. Mm-hmm. So, I view that as an opportunity. The other one I'd be remiss in not bring up too is, remember, we live in a world with 7+ billion people. They all have to eat.
Yep.
They don't all need iPhones. They don't all need cars. Every single person has got to eat. And we are in the business of producing that food. This industry is not going anywhere.
Right.
But from an opportunity perspective, it's nice to zoom out sometimes and just remember this job's not going away.
Yeah. Yeah. The last 6 months proved anything. We've always thought food is pretty essential, but when they start talking about shortages and rationing, I think that was a wake up call for everybody. So I think we found out how essential we are to, not only the U.S., but the world.
There's a lot of people alive in our nation today that'd be the first time that ever happened to them, right? Yep. It's probably been since World War II, right? That we've been through a scenario like that. And that is not comforting.
No, I was on the phone with some people that are very high up in the ag industry, in Washington just a few months ago, and they were talking about 40, 50 million people standing in food bank lines. And wow, that kind of thing plays out. It really boils everything down to what's most important. So, along the lines, Nick, of, just opportunities in ag, and we may not, as producers, be focused on the same type of production today or 5 years from now than what we are today. And you even brought up that I'm not sure we're going to be raising these type of crops. Why don't you talk about, your thoughts there? I thought that was really insightful yesterday.
Yeah. So just, the changing landscape in ag, in my opinion, is one that we probably need to embrace. When you look at the public today and the way they view agriculture, right, and the way a lot of people see how their food is produced, let's be honest, it's not positive. Mm-hmm. There's a lot more negative press out there, in my opinion, for what we do than there is positive. And like it or not, at some point that's going to lead to force change unless we're proactive about it, right? Mm-hmm. And then there's the profit side too, right? You know, I'd be hard pressed to believe that there's a whole ton of operations out there that have their eggs in one or two baskets, you know, particularly in commodities that are doing all that hot right now. And so here at home, the tact we've taken is, you know, let's be diverse. First of all, I don't want all my eggs in one basket. I want my eggs in several different baskets. You know, maybe some of those baskets may be a little less profitable than others, but what we're doing is that's a risk mitigation discount, right? More or less, just to make sure that we don't get ourselves into some real financial trouble. But then, you know, another thing 2020 did was, you know, it made us think about our food supply. And here in South Dakota, it took things back local is what it did. When you couldn't get, you know, steaks on the shelf at Costco, you went and talked to your rancher neighbor, and you were getting steak from them. And so to me, it's got us thinking about, you know, how can we take what we do, which we don't raise a lot of beef. Most of what we raise is bulls, right? But we do raise some beef. You know, how do you market that more personably? You know, how does our product not show up on the shelves at Costco? How does it show up as maybe a branded product someday? Mm-hmm. And so it gives you the opportunity to kind of disconnect yourself from the commodity system where, you know, farmers are traditionally price takers, and it kind of puts you into the position of more or less being a price maker if you play your cards right. And so, you know, I like going down that path. Now, do I know that that's the direction? Am I saying that all of eggs going to go that way? No. Is commodity corn and beans and beef going away? Absolutely not.
They'll still play a big role. Yep.
The point is, producers have the opportunity to differentiate themselves if they want to go through the work and take the risk to do it.
Yep.
And that's where we're headed.
Yeah, you know, along those lines, I just was sharing some of those same thoughts with our leaders of, you know, regardless of, you know, what happens, you know, with the White House and the Senate and the House in the election coming up next month, here's one thing that is going to continue to play out regardless, and that's we're going to have less and less people in Washington in, you know, influence positions that are from rural areas and particularly agriculture. So, you know, all of us in the industry have to face that reality and figure out how we deal with it. And the other thing is consumer demand will continue to shift. And you're right. Is corn and soybean production going to be replaced by something else in the next 3 or 4 years? No. But if you go 5-10 years out, is that 15-20% of that could be very different? If it is, that's still a big change. And, you know, if you're a young and beginning producer, 10 years is not that far off, is it, Nick?
Nope. 5 years. I mean, 5 years flew by, Mark. So
right. No, I hear you. Let's see. Where can young and beginning producers go for advice? Any thoughts there?
Well, I got the benefit of 3 members of an older generation, right, to go to. Guys that my uncle's been an egg for 50 years, my dad's been an egg for 40, my cousin's been in it for 25. So I can go to them, right? You know, we've got a healthy relationship. We make decisions as a unit, and we all bring perspective. It's sort of like a boardroom, you know, Everyone brings in their own perspective, and it's for the better. You know, so there's always that, your family that's been in it a long time. You know, another one that I've kind of embraced the last few years is talking with my peers. You know, doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to someone that has more experience than you, but listen, I've got friends that more or less, they'll be a sounding board. Hey, what do you think about this idea? Have you guys ever thought about this at home? Or, hey, did you hear about what that elevator up north's offering for this? You know, to me, it's a nice way to check yourself and not live in your own little box. And I mean, let's be honest, every operation's different. I've got friends that do things a different way than we do. And sometimes it's nice to get advice from them when we're trying something that's not working.
Sure, absolutely.
And then, of course, listen, look what we're doing right now. I'm not directly giving advice to anybody, but you can take stuff home.
What are some of the things, if you think to the past generation, that you could really learn from and capture, or all of us could? And then as you think about, you know, the next generation, what kind of things might you want to pass on to them? Any thoughts?
So what I've learned from the older generation and what I'm still learning today is listen, I'm a type A guy. I do things quick. I make decisions quick. And that's not always the smartest thing. Sometimes it's smart to slow down, let stuff, rumble around in your head for a day or two. And just, not very rarely do things happen like this.
Right.
And so I've learned that sometimes you just need to slow down, let things rest for a while before you make big decisions. That's been a big one for me. Now, what the next generation can learn from us, I'm a management guy, Mark. And that to me is where I see the tipping point is. I hope that our generation can really transition from being solely operators, to operators and managers. And I know darn well that I've got 4 sons. If any one of them decides to come back to this operation, they're going to know that a prerequisite is you're not just here to drive a tractor, buddy. You're going to be here to help make sure that we're running a business that will last to your kids. That's not a lesson that I learned from the older generation. It isn't. I want to make darn sure it gets that message goes to my kids.
Absolutely. Yeah. Back to sometimes you got to slow down. We have a motto here that sometimes you need to think through and don't just do. And, there's a lot of times where that applies because it's when things are going 100 mile an hour, it's pretty easy to do that. And granted, some decisions you got to make right away, but some of those big ones, it's better to think through once in a while. And we do have a couple questions that have come through. So the first one is, Nick, what do you feel is the biggest issue on the minds of young and beginning producers?
Well, if I was going to guess, the first one has got to be profitability. For me, it is. I spend my whole day, navigating a business through a time which historically is normal, probably, right? What we're sitting in is probably not an abnormal position. But for anyone who got into A in the last 10 years, it's been nothing but downward track, right? And we've kind of leveled off here maybe the last year or two, but things are not as easy as they were in 2012, 2013. That's just a simple fact. And so I would bet that a lot of producers spend their time worrying about, how do I make money this year? And then the next one would just be, and I hit on both of these already, so I hate to repeat myself and I apologize for that, but generational transition, what's going to happen when dad wants to be done. And for that matter, labor has got to be another hard one. It's a hard one on our operation. Most operations just can't get enough help. And that's the genuine reason why I think most people don't end up spending more time with management is they don't have the hands and the bodies to get the work done, to free the time up to do the management related stuff. I'm lucky here. I'm part of an operation that, has a lot of employees, and I spend 95% of my time in the office managing the business. Most places don't get that luxury, and it's because it's hard to find good people.
I'll shift to the next one here. Has COVID disrupted your family's operation? How did you deal with it if it did?
The short answer is no. We had one employee that got COVID. My guess is, in the future we'll get more.
Yeah.
The nice thing about living in ideal South Dakota, if anyone's been anywhere near here ever, is we live a naturally socially distanced life.
Yeah.
Very rare that we're congregated together in groups where the community spread of anything out here is highly likely. Especially like myself, I got 4 young kids. Listen, I don't go to town. I go home. I go to work and I go home and I be with my kids. So from a business perspective, we didn't lose a lot of labor force. We were never quarantined. We did make some efforts to spread ourselves out, just to, at lunchtime and in meetings and things like that. But from like a business performance perspective, we're in the tourism business. We have a hunting lodge. We were really worried about how that was going to go, but we didn't shut our doors, and we're actually up on bookings this year because a lot of other lodges did. And listen, there's a lot of people that still want to go hunting. They still want to get out of their house.
How did your family approach succession planning?
Yeah, so I'm going to start with my grandfather. My grandfather passed away a year ago, but he actually had a mind for it for a very long time. He knew, he had seen other operations that had struggled with, where the equity went when it went to the next generation. And so he planned for it. We have life insurance policies and things like that to ensure that, if any one of us ever, passes away, that all of that can be handled in an appropriate manner. But for myself to get into the operation, I mean, he gifted some ownership, and, he understood that was going to be one of the only ways that we could, without a whole lot of conflict, keep this operation in the family. And he set an example too, because I have every expectation that someday, it's going to take some gifting to get my kids in. Now, am I saying that gifting is the right answer in every situation? Absolutely not. I wouldn't expect anyone to do it, and I don't expect anyone to do it here. It's that's the hardest part, for me as a young individual with succession planning is I want to have that talk. I want to have that talk with my dad, right? But you have to be careful, because it's not my equity. It's his equity. It is not mine. And it's not mine until he says it's mine. And I'm not going to be the one there forcing anyone's hand. So it's a really delicate balance on how do you have those conversations. But, we sat down. What helped us a lot too, in our current structure, was having a third party in the room. Yep. With that consultant that we work with, yep. Because they sort of function as the referee, right? If they see yep. things getting a little inappropriate, or, conversation going away it shouldn't, you've got someone there to kind of ground you, take you back to reality more or less, and keep the conversation productive. And that's where we ended up. And to be honest, in our business, what we have now is I have a playbook on my desk that someday when one of my sons, if any of them, decide to come back, here's how this is going to go. The whole family knows, there's no questions. Here's how you get in. Here's what happens when you're in. And here's how you get out someday if you decide. Yeah. So you can come into this situation knowing what to expect. There's no surprises.
Yeah. Well, Nick, you just hit on something. If we look across, all the customers we work with, if there's one thing that is really consistent to get this thing started, is just getting that initial conversation and actually being willing to sit down and start tackling the issues. And you're right. We do see, some families have, they can get that done internally, but we probably see a growing number of them using other resources. You guys chose to use a third party, and I'm not trying to plug here, but we've got a relationship with Nationwide Insurance where they'll come in and do all of that up front with no cost, and we don't get anything for it either. It's just a service they provide in the market. My point of all that is encourage all of you to get the conversation started, and there are resources out there that you can contact to help you work through that. So,
and I'll throw another thing in that I said already, but check the emotions. Like I said, for me as a minority owner of this business, and I'm CEO, I'm a minority owner. I got a small share of this business. Listen, it's not my equity. You can't start that conversation immediately forcing an issue the way you want it to go, right? That's got to be mom or dad or uncle or whoever's in that seat with the ownership. I mean, they got to make the call. And so it's a delicate balance on how you start that conversation without immediately tripping some emotional trigger, like you're trying to force me to do one thing another way, and it's delicate, but it can be productive if you handle it right.
Absolutely. So Nick, the next question is about your wife. Nick, is your wife involved in the operation? And if so, any advice on working with your spouse?
Okay, this is going to be an unpopular answer, and I'm going to apologize in advance. My wife is not. She grew up on a farm and ranch, 30 miles south of where we live today. Grew up working on the ranch right up until we met. We met when we were 18. She was working on the farm at that point in time. And I actually asked her, Mark, I said, honey, I know you love this. And she didn't want to farm the rest of her life. But I said, I don't want you to come to work with me, because when I come home from a day at work, I want to talk to you. I want to talk about us. I don't want to talk about all the things we dealt with all day long. Just continue that conversation at the house. Right. And listen, am I saying it's a bad thing to work with your spouse? Absolutely not. There's a lot of people that view it as a great pleasure, and I'm not shooting that down. But for me personally, I see the benefit of being able to get away from work for a little while and have a life, outside of what happened from 8 to 6 or however long you were at the farm that day.
Nick, do you have other young producers that you're familiar with in the area whose spouse is involved, and any observations for how they make that work, just out of curiosity?
You know, to me, the answer has still just got to be able to separate yourself and be able to take what happens at work, whether you're working with your spouse or not with your spouse, take what happens at work and leave it there. Right. Let's go to the house. And I appreciate that I can come home. I told my wife this last night. Like I mentioned, we had a disagreement here at the operation yesterday, and, it sticks in your mind and it kind of ruins your day. But I got home and I talked to my wife and I played with my kids, and hey, I forgot about it. I forgot about the crappy day I had at work, and I wrestled with my kids, and my wife and I watched TV, and it was a great night. And I'm glad I have that.
Yeah. I've got the same thing. I'm blessed to have that as well. So Nick, we don't have any more questions, so maybe I just leave it with any just kind of final thoughts and words of advice to, these other young getting producers that are on the call with you.
Yeah. So there's one thing I want to talk about. And once again, I come from a perspective that's probably not all that fair that I share my opinion, because I'm in a scenario where we've got a good labor force, right? The work gets done. And a lot of times my hands don't get dirty day to day, right? I'm an office guy. I want to talk about work-life balance, because when you're young, it's easy to work all day and all night and never take any time off. And I was that guy. I mean, 4 or 5 years ago, Mark, I had one kid, and I was working Monday through Sunday, and I was working 8 to 8. And I come home and, see my wife at night, and I had a kid, and I realized right away, I can't do this. Yeah. I got a family here, and, and we made choices at our business because of it. And I drove them. I said, listen, our people need to have a life outside of work. And so what we did was we hired more people, right? Spread the work out. Now the work gets done Monday through Friday from 8 to 6, and then everyone can go home. And I'm gonna do you watch the show Yellowstone? You ever watch it?
Oh yeah.
My wife and I just started it. Fantastic show. But
yep.
Quote from John Dutton, and I don't like to read off of my phone, but I'm gonna do it. And he's talking about grandkids. His little grandson Tate, he loves it. Obvious. Yep. And he says, that's the thing about being a grandfather. I get to do all the things I wished I'd done with my children, and all the things I regret I get to do different.
Yep.
And I bring that quote up to say, listen, I don't want to be John Dutton. Yep. I'm going to love my grandkids, but I don't want to have to say I'm going to be a better grandfather because I wasn't there as a father, or I missed a lot of things because I was so focused on getting the work done that, my kids suffered because of it. That's the choice I've made. Work-life balance. You got to make time for your family and for your children. And that can be really hard. There's a lot of people that just don't have a choice but to work and work and work and work. But I would hope you're working towards a scenario where you can get some time off to be with your family and live your life, be with your kids and your wife or your husband.
That's great advice for all of us, Nick. That applies to each and every one of us. So we're basically about wrapping up on time here. So Nick, just can't thank you enough for taking the time and sharing your insights. It's obvious the value that you bring not only to your family's operation, but the value of being our board of directors and the insight you bring to us all the time. So really appreciate it. And thanks to all of you for joining us.
I appreciate it, Mark. And I'll say it again. It's an honor to be a part of the board of directors. It's an honor for me to get to do this kind of thing. Sometimes I got to pinch myself a little bit and think, how did I end up doing this kind of stuff? I'm honored to do it. And I'm more than happy to whoever, has questions, send them my way.
Oh, perfect. Well, thanks again, Nick. Thanks again, everyone, and take care. Wish you the very best.